Monica, how you doing?
Hi, Adam. It's so good to finally meet you in person.
Likewise.
I was fortunate enough to have you on my podcast recently, but we had never met in person. So I'm so grateful for you and your friendship and to have you here in my lovely home. So welcome.
Thank you. And no, it's always good to catch you because you're bouncing around. You're always busy, and it's like, oh, I caught her. It's like, got you now.
You've got me now. Yep. Captive audience.
Yes. So actually for our audience, for the people who may not be familiar with you, if you want to just quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. I'm Monica Crowley. I have had a very long media career, mostly Fox News and Fox Business, but I've also worked at NBC News. I've worked for ABC News. I've been on CNN, Newsmax. I've been on pretty much all of the major television networks over the course of my media career. Mm-hmm. And interestingly enough, I actually started my career working for a former president of the United States, Richard Nixon, during the last couple of years of his life. So I was not born when he was elected president. Just want to make that really clear. But I ended up working for him from 1990 until his death in 1994. It was my very first job out of college. And I'm happy to talk about that, over the course of our conversation, because how I got that job was amazing. But that was my very first job. And my last real job was working for President Trump at the U.S. Treasury Department as Assistant Secretary of the Treasury. So I've been very blessed, Adam, to have worked for not one, but two American presidents, Richard Nixon and Donald Trump. And I like to joke, man, do I know how to pick them or what? Only the most controversial presidents were, Monica. No boring presidents. Do not give me a Grover Cleveland, okay? Yeah. Only the ones who really want to make a huge difference, who are not part of the uni party, who are not part of the regime or the deep state. And I think, honestly, that is sort of instinctively what attracted me to both men, where I devoted my entire lives during those periods of my career to them and what they were trying to accomplish for America and the world. So long media career, some political career as well, right. Two American presidents. And now I'm the host of the Monica Crowley podcast, which I mentioned. I was so fortunate to have you as a guest recently. I hope everybody checks out our conversation there. Yeah. And so please go check out Monica Crowley podcast on all podcast platforms.
So actually, I have some questions for you after that.
Yes, enjoy.
What did you end up getting?
A salad. A little too healthy, but I have the salad for lunch so I could be a little naughty at dinner.
I understand. Completely understand. So Richard Nixon, he's an interesting character. I say historically because he's before my time. But sometimes you try to gauge what people are like, but you're gauging it, obviously, when it's before your time is through other people's lens. Mm-hmm. So obviously you knew him more intimately than somebody else would because you worked for him. So what kind of person was he?
I love that question, Adam. Thank you for asking it. And I get it a lot when I give speeches and things like that. I'm always talking about present day. And we can certainly talk about present day also. But I almost invariably always get that question, what was Richard Nixon like? Mm-hmm. And I think it's because he was a mysterious character, overall. And like you say, now there's more time and distance. So now he belongs to history. Whereas I actually knew the man and worked closely with him for 4 years. So right. I do get that question a lot. What was he really like? Because most Americans don't have the opportunity to meet a president, certainly not to work for a president. They may shake a hand, they may go to a rally, but they don't have that one-on-one. And so when they meet someone like me, who actually knew him so well and worked with him, like I said, so closely for 4 years, they want to know, I'm the conduit. And actually what's really interesting before I get to who he was, Adam, what's really interesting is that when he passed away, I actually went to the New York Times building to see Bill Safire. William Safire was one of President Nixon's top speechwriters when he was in the White House. And then at the end of the Nixon administration, he got a job writing op-eds for the New York Times. So he was twice a week, he was writing a column for the New York Times. And when Nixon passed away, I got a call from Mr. Sapphire asking me to come to Washington and have lunch with him like this. And I did. And, he said, well, kid, what are you going to do now? And I said, well, Mr. Sapphire, I really don't know. President Nixon was my mentor. He was my boss, and he was my friend. So I lost my job, I lost my mentor, and I'm heartbroken over the loss of a man who served as like a grandfather figure to me as well. So I was completely lost and adrift. And I had sort of off the cuff, Adam mentioned that I had been keeping a daily running diary of reconstructing every single conversation I ever had with Richard Nixon for 4 years. And I remember we were at the Army Navy Club in DC, and he had some Navy bean soup. And he was he had a spoon like this. And when I said that, he looked at me and he stopped and he put his spoon down and he said, what? And I said, well, yeah, I did this for myself, where after every conversation or at the end of the day, I would take out my journal and, to the best of my memory, reconstruct every single conversation I had with him. Because I realized at the time, Adam, what an extraordinary opportunity that was. I was 21 years old, first job out of college, working for, again, not Grover Cleveland, but one of the most controversial and significant presidents we've ever had, Richard Nixon. So I wanted to keep that running record for myself. So I remember when I said that to him, he put a spoon down and he made me repeat it. And then he said, oh, my dear, I know what you're going to do next. And I said, yeah. And he said, you're going to write a book, maybe more than one volume. And I said, oh. And he said, because you need to let the rest of the world and history know the Richard Nixon you came to know. And I immediately said, well, I understand that argument, but I had done this for me. And he said, Monica, you were taking notes while you were in these conversations with the president, right? And I said, well, yeah, I had my legal pad. And as he was talking, I was making notes. And he looked at me and he smiled. And he said, Monica, President Nixon knew exactly what you were doing, taking these notes. And he said, the entire reason you were there is for this purpose, to speak to future generations. And so I ended up writing 2 volumes about my experiences with him. And, Mr. Sapphire was a great mentor. He sort of stepped in when President Nixon passed away, really guided me through the book writing process and how to get an agent, how to get published, etc. And so I tell that story, Adam, by way of sort of framing my views about President Nixon, because he wanted me to share with the rest of the world and future generations and history who he really was. Now, I can't speak to who he was as president because, again, I was just born around that time. But the Richard Nixon that I came to know was brilliant, which even his detractors will concede. He was visionary. And when you look at the sweep of American history, Adam, we've had very few truly visionary presidents. And by visionary, I mean the uncanny ability to see all of the moving parts of the country and the world, and then to see what the world and the country was going to look like 20, 30, 40 years down the road. Yeah. And then as president, make American policy to anticipate that coming world. We've had very few visionaries, but Richard Nixon was one of them. He was also kind. He was very generous with his time, which, by the time I got to him, he was in his late 70s. So at that point, time is your most precious commodity, right? Very generous with his time, with his expertise, with his resources, always supportive of me in whatever I wanted to do. Very, very funny, too. Richard Nixon was very funny, a wonderful sense of humor, which never really showed because he didn't really allow himself to show that sense of humor.
Right.
And I used to say to him, I thought that was a huge mistake because he could be hilarious, but he looked at the vice presidency and then the presidency with a real seriousness of purpose. Mm-hmm. And he felt like, no, I'm the president of the United States. There's a seriousness here and a gravitas to this job. So he never wanted to appear flippant. But I mean, Richard Nixon was never going to appear flippant, right? He was a very serious man anyway.
Right.
But when he was funny, he was so brilliant with his humor. And actually, I think if he had shown more of that side of him, not that it would have stopped Watergate, but it would have bought him more goodwill, I think, with the American people if he had shown his sense of humor and great warmth that he just naturally had.
That's interesting. Actually, I was going to ask you if you did touch on it. Do you have a sense of humor? Because I think having a sense of humor is it's a really big thing for me to get to know someone. Mm-hmm. Like people that say, "Oh, Adam's serious," but people who get to know me, like I'm rather introverted and quiet, and it's like a little bit side topic, but like I'm pretty introverted and quiet. And my in-laws, when we first got together, they're like, "What are you two?" And she'd be like, "Adam is funny as hell." My wife is telling a friend, he's like, "What? Like Adam's like he's that guy? Like he's always quiet. And, he's in the corner." I was like, "No, when you get to know him, Adam is funny as hell." And now they've gotten to know me. They're like, and I start cracking jokes, and it always catches people off guard. So I find having a sense of humor to be very, very important. Mm-hmm. And I like being around someone who doesn't take themselves too seriously.
Yeah.
People who don't have a sense of humor are basically like leftists. They take themselves way too
seriously. Yeah. And they are generally, and I know this is a sweeping statement and probably a bit unfair, but as a sweeping generalization, mm-hmm. most leftists are totally humorless.
Yeah.
They are bitter, they are angry, they are ideologues, and they are miserable.
Yeah.
Very few of them have a sense of humor. And even now, when you look at the scope of late night television, mm-hmm. it used to be Johnny Carson and then, Jay Leno, and they would make fun of both sides of the aisle. And it was bipartisan. Saturday Night Live, too, same thing. Mm-hmm. And because the left has gone completely off the rails, and we are in a rolling Marxist revolution right now, mm-hmm. They have all become now just water carriers for the left. It's the Democrats and the communists. The leftist enforcement arm is the imperial media, which is Nixon's phrase, by the way, which I've now adopted, the imperial media. Mm. And so all of these late night hosts who are hired to be funny and deliver some levity at the end of the day for people. Like we used to, America used to come together and watch Johnny Carson. It was pretty much it for a long time, right? Mm-hmm. It was like Jack Parr and then Johnny Carson. And there were only 3 networks. So we had a common cultural touchstone. We had the movies. We had 3 networks. So everybody was watching Ed Sullivan on Sunday nights. And then at 11:30 at night, after your local news, the entire country was watching Johnny Carson, right? And so everybody had a commonality that they could relate to their fellow American. Hey, man, did you see Johnny Carson last night? Oh, yeah, he had on Ruth Buzzy, and she was hysterical, Or B. Arthur was hilarious last night on Carson. Did you see it? Now everything is atomized. And everything has been fractured culturally. And so we're all like seeking out our own little niche to have our viewpoints reinforced. Right. Because there's no more common ground for sure, but you don't have anything culturally that's common ground. And all of these so-called funny guys are no longer funny because they've gotten political. So they've alienated half of their audience. They're not interested in appealing to the other 50% of the country because they need their left-wing street cred. And this means their bosses at their networks, the audience, their social circle, they all need to be validated. So they go out with the anti-Trump stuff, attacking the America First movement and people who vote for Trump. And it is completely alienating.
Mm.
So again, that is a circle way of saying that Richard Nixon was very funny. And, but he was very judicious about, employing a sense of humor. Again, the seriousness of the purpose of trying to change America and the world for the better. He didn't want to dilute that by being like a cut up all the time.
Right.
But there are a couple of famous things, like when he went on Laugh-In, I think in 1969, he went on Laugh-In, and their tagline was "Sock it to me." And he famously delivered as "Sock it to me." So after Watergate, the punchline to that was, yeah, they certainly did. Sock it to him. But, all of our politicians, like Donald Trump, is inherently hilarious.
Right.
He is a natural comedian, right? Just comic timing, quick on his feet. Other politicians aren't, but they care to learn, right? Joe Biden is long gone. Obama could deliver a line, pretty well.
Right.
They'd write it for him and he'd rehearse it and he could deliver it pretty well. I think it serves leaders really well when they are either naturally funny or at least care to learn.
Right. I wonder if you're absolutely right. Trump does have a great sense of humor. So, all right. So you understand. I'm a former Democrat. When I left the party, it was prior to Trump's reelection, or his reelection attempt, I should say. So it was prior to that. And I remember coming up to the election, like when you lose that fog over like, oh, he's the worst thing that's ever, like when you get past that, because the reasons why someone like myself thought that tend to be a lie. Now, it doesn't mean that he's perfect or, or anything like that. But you become more realistic and rational rather than emotional. It's like, oh, it's him. Like, well, did you actually listen to what he had to say? Or so when I left that and just started looking at him as a guy, right, who's the president, right? He's not the reincarnation of Satan or anything like that. He's just a man. And when you start looking at him in that particular way, I was like, Donald Trump is kind of funny. Like you start looking at him and some of the stuff, like I called him the most honest liar because the stuff that you should lie about, he would tell the truth about. And the stuff you shouldn't lie about, he would lie about. And I was like, why do you lie about that? You didn't even have to do that. But then he would tell the stuff that he would tell the truth about, that you're like, he probably shouldn't have said that. That was even more hilarious. Like, I think it was one time he was like, the FBI, they don't want me to talk about it. It was like, you probably shouldn't. Like, but it was just, I started looking at him like that. I was like, I do kind of like that he has a sense of humor. Now, there are things that, there are things that I still don't like about Trump. But I think it's not about Trump. It's not like some people just can't be objective. And it's just like, no matter what, I hate the way he breathes. Like they just hate everything. It's like, no, I wouldn't like it if Trump did it or anybody else did this, like those type of things. And so I feel better as far as analyzing Trump from a distance, at least. But I do actually kind of like that he has a sense of humor. However, I will say, I don't necessarily mind if a president doesn't have that strong sense of humor. So like someone like DeSantis, who was, trying to run for president, it was kind of unfair because he's being measured by Trump. Like in a sense that we didn't necessarily expect our politicians to be comedians, to be super charismatic. If they happened to be, then that was great. But it became like, oh, he's so stiff. And then when they try to have him do stuff, he doesn't seem comfortable doing it. It's like, yeah, because he's not comfortable doing it. He's a policy, what do I have to do today? Let's accomplish it. Like he just seems like almost like a typical kind of military guy, which is not an insult, but they're very task oriented. And I was like, but that's him.
Disciplined.
Right, and disciplined. So like, let him be him. That's him. But everybody wants him to come out as like, did you hear that line that he delivered? It's like, yeah, but that like doesn't feel like him. Like, and he shouldn't have to do that. So I think that's the only downside with having someone like Trump, who is like who's unique, incredibly unique. And having people measure by such uniqueness. It'd be like if we looked at the NBA and we measured every player by Michael Jordan. It's like, but that's not fair.
To everybody else.
Right. It's not fair. So that's kind of how, not necessarily in greatness, but in uniqueness, I should say. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. And I think about my first boss, way before my time. The first time he ran for president was in 1960. Nixon ran against JFK. John F. Kennedy. And Nixon had just spent 8 years as Eisenhower's vice president. So, and the Eisenhower administration was a very effective one for the American people. So Nixon was supposed to be a shoo-in, but the Democrats chose one of their up-and-comers, John F. Kennedy, to run. And, Nixon and Kennedy were friendly. They had entered Congress at the same time. They had entered the Senate at the same time. And they were friendly. And, at the time, the ideological and party splits were not nearly as dramatic as they are today. So they were both hawks on the Soviet Union. They were both Cold Warriors. Very little difference. And when JFK got in there, he actually cut taxes to try to spur economic growth. Kennedy could not get elected in today's Democrat Party, which is a Marxist party.
Right.
But in that election in 1960, JFK and Nixon were roughly the same age, but Nixon looked older because there was a real seriousness to the man, right? They used to say Nixon was an introvert in an extrovert's profession. And so he was like an inward looking guy, although he was very good at retail politics. He doesn't get enough credit for that, but he was essentially an intellectual. He liked being alone. He wasn't a loner, but he liked being alone to read and think. Whereas Kennedy was very gregarious and a charmer and everything else. Right. And Kennedy was, Richard Nixon, when he was young, was a handsome man. But to your point, JFK was so extraordinarily handsome, like movie star good looking, that it made Nixon pale in comparison, right? So it's all like a relative sliding scale. And then, on this point about performance, Nixon was an intellectual. He had just been VP for 8 years. He knew the issues inside and out. And so in those Nixon-Kennedy debates, the famous story about the debate is that Richard Nixon had slammed his knee into a car door, and the knee became infected. So he had to go into the hospital for a couple of days and get pumped full of antibiotics. This was in like the 2 weeks or so leading up to the debate. He was in the hospital. When you're in the hospital, you're not eating because food is not great. So he had lost weight. He got pale. He was on antibiotics. He looked drawn. Kennedy spent the week before that debate in Palm Beach at his family's compound, outside, getting a tan, relaxing, studying the issues. So by the time the night of the debate rolled around and Nixon refused makeup, huge legendary mistake, because Kennedy did do the makeup, but he already had the natural tan going, etc. And he strolled onto stage. Nixon was like limping onto the stage. He was pale, refused the makeup, still had the infection. So he had a bit of a fever. So he was sweating. So my point here is that it's all relative. People who watched the debate on television thought Kennedy won. People who had listened to the debate on radio thought Nixon had won because his content, the strength of his policies, his arguments, much stronger than JFK. But the image of the tan, rested and ready JFK to the pale, pasty, sick Richard Nixon turned a lot of people off. Right. And so to your point about Trump, he's so extraordinary. that everybody else is going to recede in his presence. And that includes Governor DeSantis, who is the best governor the Republican Party has had in a very long time. Certainly the best governor right now in the United States, doing everything right. But I used to argue when he announced, I'm a Trump loyalist. Donald Trump is my friend. I've been with him since he came down the escalator. But I love Governor DeSantis, and what he has done here in the state of Florida is miraculous. He is courageous. He's gutsy. He pushes back. He's doing everything right. But there is a huge difference between being an effective governor of a big state like Florida and running for president. And then it's something else entirely to run for president against Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And I just knew right away, I said, you know, I thought the governor wasn't going to do it because of the extraordinary nature of Trump, but he did it. And to his credit, when he stepped back from the race, he immediately endorsed Donald Trump. And now he's in the process of campaigning for Trump and raising money for him.
So I'm of the mindset when, like, everybody, when they talk about politics, especially like running for office, they always say, like, wait your turn and wait for this time. Oh, you know, in 8 years, that person would be great. It's like, that's not how any of this ever works, right? If you're getting a lot of support to do it, you better do it now. Because I remember, I don't know if you remember this, but I remember when Chris Christie, people were like, Chris Christie should run. And he was like, no, I'm not. And that quickly went out of favor. And never did anybody ever consider him as a serious candidate. But he had a moment and he decided not to take it and never came back again. So you can't ever presume that your time will be there. If you're hot right now, you have to kind of run with it. 'Cause that's when you get donors, you know, you get all the support. They want to do it now. And so that's how I saw it. Was it an uphill battle? Absolutely. Right? Was he likely to win? No, he wasn't likely to win. But I saw it as a good thing that he was willing to do it. He was willing to go through it because he could run again if he wants to. That's his prerogative, especially because Trump will be out of his way, more than likely. But there's so many different circumstances. But Trump will be out of his way for him to do so. So, you know, I have no problem with him testing the waters. I think the only thing that was kind of a shame, and I say this as someone who's not a Republican, I'm an independent, who's willing to vote Republican. I think that the biggest shame that came out of that was there became like this odd divide between the DeSantis supporters and the Trump supporters. And I think it was very unfortunate because, like you said, DeSantis, even though I'm saying he should do it anyways, and he did attempt to run, but he's the future. Like, to me, he's clearly the future. He is young, he's effective, and he has a support base now. If he keeps this up, he's the future. So why would you want to tear him apart completely, right? Or say, I would never, like, it just became kind of hyperbolic. And it seemed more hyperbolic than the typical primaries. Because when I was a Democrat, I would hear the same thing between the Obama and the Hillary, you know, but it didn't seem as strong. Or even like, I think Hillary and Bernie, the Bernie bros.
Yeah.
Right? But even that, it didn't seem as strong and as consistent. And even some people who are still, like, he's been out of the race and they're still like, I won't ever support Trump ever. And some people, I will never, you know, DeSantis is a deep state shill or whatever, you know, accusation you want to use. So I thought that was kind of a shame for it to go that far. If you like Trump, you want to support him, go for it. If you like DeSantis, go for it. But it was like this, I always hate when, if you support something, you feel the need to tear something else down. You don't have to do that.
Right.
So I was more so of a DeSantis supporter. I was like, if he becomes the nominee, I'll vote for DeSantis. But I wasn't willing to tear down Trump in the meantime. It wasn't necessary.
So, I did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
So, like I said, I've known Donald Trump, a little bit over the years from New York before he ever decided to run. And when he came down that escalator, as far as I know, I was the very first non-family person in the media to support him. It was like 72 hours after he came down the escalator, and I went on Fox News with Bill O'Reilly, and then like the next morning with Don Imus, and they were all having a hearty chuckle, laughing about Trump, like, hey man, this is a vanity run. He's not going to last 3 weeks. This is about his brand and The Apprentice and everything. And I looked at the two of them, and they're tough sons of guns. They were both my friends. O'Reilly still is. But I was dead serious. I was not going down the road of like laughing up a storm. And I looked at them both and I said, stop laughing. Do not underestimate him. He's going to pull the whole thing off. And when I say whole thing, he's not just going to be the Republican nominee. He is going to be the president of the United States. And they were both like blown back. It's hard to render Bill O'Reilly speechless, but I did. And that sort of famously became, oh, Monica Crowley. So then I took a lot of slings and arrows because people thought I was an idiot and what was I doing and all of that. And I said, no, my gut instinct, man, tells me he is going, after 8 years of Obama, destroying the country. I was like, the country is different. The Republican Party is different. The base is different. They have had it. Mm-hmm. They want something different. And so I just saw it from the first moment. And Trump never forgot that. Anyway, so I've been loyal to him literally since day one. Mm. Okay. But that, to me, it didn't mean tearing down, to your point, Governor DeSantis. Okay. I have never said one negative thing about Ron DeSantis because I know him a little bit as well. I know his wife, Casey. They are lovely. They're really smart. As a team, they've been extraordinary in Florida. We're sitting here in Florida because it is a free state, largely thanks to Ron DeSantis. So I would never say anything negative about him. And I do think he's got a bright future. There are a couple of conditions on that we could talk about, but yeah. I couldn't understand, like, to your point, I couldn't understand the people who were tearing him apart. You can be a Trump loyalist like me and hold your tongue. Mm-hmm. Now, the other candidates who are ripping Trump to shreds, the Chris Christies of the world, oh, I have no patience for them. Do not come from my boy. Right. I will cut you. And I did. I've got no patience for that. But Governor DeSantis wasn't going for Trump's throat. He was trying to make his case out there. And I actually think that that makes the party stronger to have different points of view. Here's what I've done in Florida. Make your case. And, so much of what Governor DeSantis has done in Florida is take on the whole woke infrastructure and DEI and education. He's done a great job. That's not necessarily Donald Trump's forte. Right. Donald Trump's forte is deliver a booming economy, enforce the border, law and order, and world peace. That's what I want from an American president. The woke stuff is a really important part of what the next president should do. So I actually appreciated Governor DeSantis talking about that on the campaign trail. Donald Trump's out here talking about his first term and what he did in all these other areas. Unbelievable. But I appreciated DeSantis chiming in on the conversation with, well, here's what I've done in the laboratory of Florida to make a real difference. I think that strengthens the party. It broadens the appeal. I'm like, great, you come from my boy, I will take you out. But DeSantis didn't. Right. So I never said a negative word about him at all. I just saw his wife at a lunch the other day here in Florida. Lovely, I'm still friendly with the two of them. I will say this. I do think he's got a future, assuming like the next couple of years of his governorship are without scandal, without some major crisis that he mishandles, like a hurricane. And if he screws that up, we saw what happened with George W. Bush in New Orleans with Katrina. Assuming things continue to go, I think he is absolutely a front runner, should he choose to do this again. This very smart thing he did was drop out and then immediately endorse Donald Trump. because this is Donald Trump's party and this is the America First movement. So I think the future belongs to America First. So when Trump is gone from the political scene, the party base is never going back to the establishment. It's never going back to Jeb Bush or John McCain or Mitt Romney. That is not happening. So successful GOP candidates in the future will have to be America First, especially at the presidential level. And if you are not, you're done. So Governor DeSantis needs to be very smart, and I think he has been so far, about following that path of America First. Now, a lot of people, as you say, in the movement refuse to forgive him for challenging Donald Trump. And I don't think DeSantis weakened Donald Trump at all.
No.
Okay. Donald Trump is in a category by himself. Democrats are trying to weaken him. The deep state's trying to weaken him. Transnational organizations like the World Economic Forum, they're trying to hit him. He is still standing stronger than ever. That is a testament to him and the power of the America First movement. Subsequent Republicans are going to have to navigate that, because if they're going to say, oh, we're going to go back to pre-2015, they will be done. The base will not. I think the base is willing to forgive DeSantis. Maybe for some it's a little too soon, but we're talking 5 years from now. That could be a different story. The other point that I just wanted to make about you talking about windows of opportunity and how Chris Christie missed his window. He chickened out.
It was a very brief window.
It was a very brief window when he was hot on the national scene. And he could have struck while the iron was hot, but he chickened out. He decided not to do it. I think that was 2012, right?
I think it was shortly after Hurricane Sandy.
Okay. Hurricane Sandy was 2012.
Yeah.
Maybe it was, but it was October of 2012. So it would have been too late. So maybe it was 2016. He decided not to run. Anyway.
Yeah, it was. I can't remember the timeline.
And he did miss his window of opportunity.
Yeah.
He did. And so I think a lot of people may have approached, and I don't know this, but I think a lot of people may have approached Governor DeSantis and said, you do not want to be the next Chris Christie. Like you don't want to miss your window of opportunity. You're very hot now. You're the best, most effective governor. Do it now. And I think he did it. I don't think he should, but I had no problem with him, getting in and campaigning as he did. But nobody was going to beat Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Because Donald Trump, Adam, has something every politician wishes they had, but none of them do, which is an emotional bond with the American people. Donald Trump's bond is not ideological. It's not even political. It's emotional. And that's why, with his way of words, sometimes I'm like, oh my God, what is he saying? And I love the guy. But remember years ago when he said, yeah, I could go out on Fifth Avenue and shoot somebody. And I would still, that was an indelicate way of what I'm saying, which is that the America First movement, the base, but now it's getting even more inclusive because he is picking up huge numbers of core Democrat constituencies, Black voters, Latino voters, young people. They're hemorrhaging away from the Democrat Party and they're coming to the GOP. And in large part, it is Trump. I mean, it's Biden's failures too, obviously. But it's Trump. He is creating these cross currents. He's riding the cross currents. But man, he saw it happen. The forgotten men and women of this country being cast aside for globalism. And he got right in there with a message of an emotional-based message, not a political one. He went to the American people in 2015 and 16 and said, especially to the forgotten men and women of all parties, races, genders, didn't matter. He said, I see you, I hear you, and I will be your champion. The hair still stands up when I repeat that because, and I've said this to him too, it is a very powerful appeal. And so in 2016, the American people took a leap of faith and they were like, well, this guy's never done it before, but he can't be worse than what we've had. And he spent the next 4 years delivering for the forgotten men and women. with all of the things that I laid out, booming economy, trade deals to protect America's workers, enforced border, protecting the American people. And so right now, the American people, those who support him, cannot wait to vote for him again. This is the power of the rallies and it's genuine affection and respect and love for this man. Mm-hmm. Love. Nobody was going to surmount that, whether on the GOP side and Biden. I mean, the whole thing is a joke and a sham. Nobody can surmount that when you have a leader that has that kind of love going into an election for them, and people want to protect him. It's a previously unbelievable, like a dynamic where the American people want to protect him from all of the slings and arrows coming his way, including the Democrats' lawfare. This is basically why January 6th happened, because his supporters were like, wait a minute, they're stealing the election from this guy. He has taken so many metaphorical bullets for us. It's time to stand up and fight for him. And they still believe that now more than ever.
You said a lot there. So one of the areas that I was thinking about is, I've kind of still ironed this out in my head, but it's something that I'm picking up. Because you were saying the party would never go back to the Mitt Romneys of the world, mm-hmm. right? And I know what you mean by that. One of the things that I give props to Trump about, he made the Republican Party a Big Ten party. Mm-hmm. If you like me, come and join me. What do you have to lose? Like, mm-hmm. that was like his general message. I don't care who you are, come and support me.
Did that appeal to you as a Democrat in 2016? Especially when he went into Black communities and he said, what the hell do you have to lose?
No, because I was still under a bit of a gaze. Mm-hmm. So it didn't hit me because I was still seeing him as nefarious.
In retrospect, do you feel like you were brainwashed by the Democrat Party?
Not by the party itself, but its proxy, the mainstream media.
The imperial media,
yes,
as Nixon said.
The imperial media. I wouldn't even necessarily say I was brainwashed, because I'm very analytical. So if you give me information, I'm going to analyze it. But if you give anybody bad information or biased information, then that's limiting the pool of information. But if they don't know that it's bad or it's biased, then that's also something else. So I can only analyze the information that I have mm-hmm. in front of me. And when you believe that the information that's given to you is good information, then why would you look mm-hmm. elsewhere? It wasn't until I realized that the information I've been considering, and yes, there's a little bit of emotion when it comes to politics, but the information I've been given is wrong, often. Or like the biggest narrative, which I probably like the biggest thing that broke me out, was good people on both sides. And I thought to myself, I've seen them say good people on both sides for years at that point. And they said it as like this rhetorical point. He supports white supremacists, blah, blah, blah. And when I saw it in full context, and he mm-hmm. says, I am not talking about these people.
Right.
And I said, oh, shit.
You realized you were being fed propaganda.
I was being fed propaganda. It's not like it was this one moment that happened and they talked about it for a day or two. This was a driving point mm-hmm. year after year.
They're still talking
about it, right? And in full context, you learn that they're willing to take something where the full context exists, mm-hmm. right? So it's not like a mystery. Mm-hmm. You just have to rewind about 10 or 20 seconds and you'll see the full context of what he was saying. If they're willing to lie about that, what else are they lying about? So for me, it wasn't about being necessarily brainwashed. It was me realizing that the information that I am consuming is incomplete, at the very least. And from there, that's when I was like, let me consume all types of media.
What were you listening to before? Was it like CNN and MSNBC, like exclusively?
Yeah.
And you felt that you needed to watch them because why? You were a Democrat and those were the Democrat channels?
I don't know if it was necessarily that. That's just, CNN goes by was it most trusted name in media or in news or whatever they're saying.
Another lie.
Yeah, exactly. So, and listen, I'm okay that people are partisan. I'm okay if Fox is partisan. I'm okay if MSNBC is partisan. But it's when you pretend that you're not. That's my issue. So, okay, if we have a left-wing outlet, then we have a left-wing outlet. At least I know when I tune in, I'm getting a left-wing perspective. Daily Wire, we are a conservative media outlet. Cool. I understand your lean. Doesn't mean that everything that they're saying is right or wrong. They have a lean. But when you pretend that you're just to be trusted and that everything you're saying is without fluff and no bias, we're just giving it how it actually is, like how the New York Times used to be seen as, whatever's printed here is the truth. When they have that and they're lying to you or they're not giving you the full information, then that's when I lose my default trust, which I shouldn't have really had. So now I'm at a point where I listen, I analyze, I verify. I don't trust. Mm-hmm. And this goes for everybody. Mm-hmm. So if it doesn't sound like it makes sense, I've heard stuff coming from right-leaning media outlets. I'm like, that doesn't sound right. And then I'll go and look, and sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. I was like, there's more to that. I don't think that's exactly it. They're being hyperbolic about this. But everybody does it. That's the biggest takeaway that I got, is that everybody lies a little bit, or everybody has a little bit of a lean, or they, at the very least, they ignore this part. Mm-hmm. They're not lying, but it's a lie by omission.
Sins of commission and sins of omission.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly. So, and I think that's how people should analyze the media. And I say this as also someone who's in the media, is that we all have a bias. I try to be objective as much as possible, but I understand what the game is. And as long as people know that there's a game, then I'm cool with it. It's when they pretend that there isn't one.
Right.
That's all.
Yeah. No, I totally agree with you. I mean, I'm totally upfront about, hey, I'm a Republican my entire life. I've worked for former President Richard Nixon. I've worked for a former President Donald Trump. Hope to work with him again in his second term. I've always been out there.
Yeah.
It is the people who pretend that they're fair when they're not, or that they're one thing when they're not. It's incredibly deceptive.
Right.
Right. And what's happened now with the imperial media is that they've always been biased to the left. Walter Cronkite, they did a better job of covering up for that.
That's what I think too.
Vietnam sort of blew that to pieces because the famous saying, when Walter Cronkite started to say on the CBS Evening News, this war isn't going well. The famous saying was then, if you've lost Cronkite, you've lost the country. Mm-hmm. They used to do a better job of kind of disguising their bias. But what's happened in the years since, and like the 50 years since, is that the press has taken their level of activism and intensity off the charts. So the level of activism and intensity is now here at 100, whereas before it was maybe 50 or 60. Now they just don't make any bones about it. They're just out there as the propaganda enforcement arm for the left. And so they're definitely part of the equation now on the left. So it's no longer fair and balanced. Here is a fair and balanced news source from the imperial media I'm talking about.
Right.
Now it's all coming with an agenda. And for people who don't recognize the agenda, they're being spoon-fed propaganda that they're believing when it's just out and out lies on behalf of the regime.
That's what I feel like too, because one of the reasons why, besides the media lying, but almost simultaneously, when you start discovering other forms of media, you start discovering more information that was never told to you.
Yes.
And I started realizing, they're not really hiding much anymore. Because it used to, I don't know, there used to be something where it was not so overt. And now it's pretty overt. Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it has to do with how our media makes money now, in comparison to years ago, where now they have to get clicks, right? New York Times has to get subscribers, right? It's not a given that your newspaper is going to be everywhere like it used to be. Now people go online and get their news, right? How do you compete with that? Well, you got to do more sensational stuff. You have to find your demographic, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I think it's like 95% of the reader base are Democrats.
Mm-hmm.
So they went hard into it. Whereas maybe before they would have some variation in perspective. They would have some different type of voices. Even if there was a lean, they would have some voice. Now it doesn't seem like. Was it Tom Cotton had that one piece and they freaked out?
And by the way, it was a very mild piece about, using the National Guard to quell some of these Antifa and Black Lives Matter riots that were getting violent and destroying private property, public property. It was a very mild request. And he was a sitting senator. Mm-hmm. So he should have been published in the New York Times. But as a senator, he wasn't the president. He didn't have the authority to actually do the National Guard, right? President Trump had requested the National Guard on January 6th, and Nancy Pelosi blocked it.
Right.
And Schumer blocked it. But anyway, that's a separate conversation. Yeah, I mean, I think to your point, you're exactly right about the way advertising and revenue is now structured. They're all so desperate because, to the point we were making earlier, everything is so fractured that they're all competing. Like in conservative media, we're all competing for the same ad dollars from the same companies that are unafraid to advertise on a conservative podcast like my show. Mm-hmm. They're unafraid, but those companies are, there are a few of them, and we're so grateful for them. But say ExxonMobil may not want to advertise on the Monica Crowley podcast because I'm considered controversial, even though I'm only telling the truth and explaining exactly what's going on in the country and the world. I understand their point of view, but, then the ad dollars get tight for niche. Not that we're niche, but, that the ad dollars start to shrink because there's so many places for that money to go. And so even if you're the New York Times or you're CNN, you're getting increasingly desperate for advertising money, right? Revenue streams, where are they coming from? And so that is definitely feeding into it. I also think there's this huge ideological and social element to this where the people running these news organizations now, Adam, they're part of the clique. They're part of the in crowd now. Yeah. And they don't want to be outcast in any way. They don't want to be ostracized. They want to continue doing the work of the regime. And so they keep going down this road. Look at what just happened at NPR. NPR had a major top editor write a piece saying NPR is like way off the reservation. And he said, the bias is so deep, they don't even see the bias anymore. And the reason they don't see it is because there are no conservatives there. Mm-hmm. And he said, in the newsroom, 87 reporters, producers, editors, 0 Republicans. So he goes and tells and he was a Democrat, he was a liberal, but he's like, this is not small L liberalism, which always wanted to encourage a healthy exchange of ideas about how to better the country and the world. It's like, this isn't small L liberalism. This is totalitarianism. This is literally state-run media, and we all pay for NPR, so it literally is state-run media. And for his courage in pointing this out, NPR suspended him because they can't have any dissenting voices making them look bad with their left-wing crew. Right. So he comes out, he tells the truth. He said, look, I'm a Democrat, but this is super unhealthy. Taxpayers are paying for this. We should have all points of view represented. And Adam, years ago, I actually did like a once a week or once a month little like 60-second commentary for NPR. That went by the wayside a long time ago when they decided like MSNBC, and I was on MSNBC in the mid 2000s, I anchored 2 separate live hours every day, 5 days a week. They would never in a million years hire me now, right?
Mm.
Because they don't want the social media mobs. They don't want the condemnation from their social crowds at cocktail parties, but they also don't want the social media crowds doing a gigantic pile-on like, oh, you hired Monica Crowley, we're done, we're boycotting MSNBC until you get rid of her. And most of the leadership at these networks and other institutions are so cowardly that they would throw me overboard to make the bleeding stop. They would cry uncle, right? Like, oh, we're letting her go. And this is what happens literally all the time. So right now in America, across the board, every institution from government to academia, to corporate America, to big tech, to the culture in Hollywood, the inmates are running the asylum.
Yeah, that's what it feels like.
Totally.
Actually, I want to rewind just a little bit, just for a second, because when I brought up Trump and the Big Tent, Republican Party, once again, I say this not as a Republican, but just as someone who is looking at it, and I'm surrounded by a lot of Republicans these days, including candidates. I think maybe not necessarily a return to the Mitt Romneys, but I think that there is a motivated base that wants to return to the small tent party. And I think some of those same people are part of the, people who say like evangelical base. Because from my perspective, prior to Trump, the evangelical base was significant as far as having some sort of say. There's a lot of, they call it like purity tests, what's your favorite scripture, things of that nature. They still kind of ask that. It's now a thing. But there used to be kind of a really big point of power. For me, this is all about power. Who gets the say?
Absolutely.
And I say this as a Christian. I'm weird when it comes to politics and faith and the use of faith within politics, because I feel like most of faith is personal. And while there are some acts and things that you can do, but I think there's a very easy way to manipulate using faith, or say that me seeking power is because of faith, when it sounds self-serving. So when I hear someone say, if you're a Christian, you wouldn't vote Democrat, I have a instinctual issue with that, because that doesn't sound right to me. Because I understand you're a Republican, you're a lifelong Republican. You have your reasons as to why you're a Republican. Someone else has their reasons as to why they're a Democrat. But the reasons that you would never be a Democrat aren't necessarily the same reasons why they are a Democrat. So the very worst thing that a Democrat, let's say for you, the number one reason you wouldn't be a Democrat is because of abortion, right? Let's just say. But for the person who's voting Democrat, abortion is not even on their mind, right? So everybody has their focus as to why they're voting for what. And to make it seem like the worst of a particular party is the entirety of their party is not fair. It's not fair when they do it to Republicans. It's not fair when Republicans do it to Democrats, right? So I know that not all Democrats are the AOCs, are the squad. I know that. I know, I've talked to them. I've sat down with them. They don't like her, right? Because there's a spectrum. And just like not everybody who's a Republican is, I don't even want to throw names, because I feel like when I throw something names
you get in trouble.
I get in trouble. Yeah. But you understand what I mean. Like the most extreme, whatever you can imagine is the most extreme person who might be on the right. It's not fair when that happens. Like everybody pays a penalty because of one voice. And so when someone uses faith, uses Christianity especially, as a means to say, if you want to be a good Christian, you know which party to vote for. Something about that doesn't sit right with me. Now, I am not for abortion. I'm very much so pro-life, 100%. That's like the one thing I'm extreme on is abortion. Because everybody likes to have the sacrificial, well, if it was rape or incest, I'm kind of like, life is life. And I've talked to people who were born out of rape. Is their life less valuable because their mother was raped and that's how they were conceived? Or is life precious in the story?
No matter what.
So I'm extreme in that person. I understand that. But I don't think that we should be using Christianity as a point of power and leverage, or manipulating people on their faith to do what I want for political gain. And I see that there might be that push once Trump walks out the door, right? Trump said, if you support me, you support me, right? And so that, remember the whole narrative that Republicans don't like gays? Well, not under Trump. Trump didn't care. Trump didn't care. Trump invited gay people over to Mar-a-Lago. You don't care. As long as you like him, he likes you.
That's true.
But I know that there are some Republicans, maybe it is rooted in their faith, who do not like gays. Are we going to that return where that saying, the Republicans hate gays, has more validity? Like, are we returning back to the smaller tent? And I've seen people say, yeah, we need a smaller tent. Oh, okay. See, and I'm hearing more and more of it from people behind the scenes, from people in the know who are like, yeah, I'm hearing these conversations within the party itself. I'm hearing these conversations on places like Twitter, regular people saying this. And I'm wondering, are these people who are jockeying for position once Trump is inevitably out of the picture? And so that's my worry for, granted, not my party, but that's my worry. And I say not my party, I think it is good to have two healthy political parties. I want two healthy political parties. Mm-hmm. I don't like it that the Democrats have gone insane.
Yeah. I
would rather them get more so to, like how you talked about, where the differences aren't as stark, where it's just like, it's a moderation here and some moderation there, and that's why you're in a different party. But now it just seems so separate, and everybody is going into their ends, and the extremes are getting louder and louder. So I don't think that's a good, healthy party for the Republican Party to go back to that. Mm-hmm. That's all.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. And I think the tendency to want to go back to everybody's corners when Trump is gone from the political scene is going to be very strong, because he is such a unique character and so strong and charismatic that he can bring all of these threads together. He's not just a regular candidate, right? He is leading a movement. Mm. So what happens to the movement when he is no longer the leader of it? Now, I think as long as he draws breath and is upright above ground, he will be the leader of the America First movement. There will come a time, because none of us can live forever, when he is no longer that. And that's what I worry about, because I think, everything's going to spin back out again.
Yeah.
But his job, and he's aware of it, is to deeply entrench America First as the new Republican Party. And he's had tremendous success with it so far doing that. But you really do need a strong leader, not necessarily charismatic, but a strong leader to keep all of these factions together. Because I'm telling you, the base, it's sort of like that old saying, you can take Jenny off the farm mm-hmm. and bring her back to the big city, but once she's seen the big city, she's not going back to the farm. The base is not going back to the farm. Mm. The establishment would like a pre-2015 America again. And a lot of them are on the record saying that. And it's not just Democrats, it's a lot of establishment Republicans too. They look at Trump as the ultimate disruptor, which he is, but he came in disrupting for you and me, right. For disrupting for the average person. The regime, the uniparty regime, can't have that, because he's upset their entire corrupt status quo and their entire corrupt gravy train, where they were all making big money, keeping America's problems festering. Donald Trump comes in and he's like, oh, America has these problems. Okay, I'm going to come in and fix it. The Uniparty is like, we can't fix these problems because we need a reason to go back to our constituents every 2, 4, 6 years and say, re-elect me. This time we're serious about the budget, the border, illegal immigration, world peace, rebuilding the military, whatever the issue is.
Yeah.
But they never do, because it's in their interest to keep those issues and those problems bubbling along. Trump comes in. Here's an example. Trump comes in, the entire foreign policy establishment out of the State Department, but also permanent Washington. They say to him, you can't talk to Kim Jong-un, and Trump out of North Korea. And he was like, what are you talking about? They're like, no. And they give him like a massive briefing book on all of the reasons why he can't talk to Kim Jong-un out of North Korea. And he's like, this is BS. I'm the president of the United States. He's the head of North Korea. Of course we can have a conversation. Right. And they were like, no, don't. It's gonna piss off the Chinese, and the Russians are gonna get involved. And he's like, well, fine, I'll pick up the phone then and call President Xi in Beijing and deal with that if that happens. But if I want to talk to a world leader, of course and he'd pick up the phone and talk to him. My point being, Donald Trump coming in as a guy who had never done any of this before actually started fixing America's problems and showing them all up and making a really important point, Adam. He was showing that the job is not that hard. And by that, I mean the entire uni-party regime created this mystique around the American presidency that somehow you needed to be one of them to do it, which is entirely opposed to what the founding fathers wanted. Founding fathers created an entire government of, by, and for the people. What they had in mind, which is what they were country lawyers, farmers, local booksellers in Boston. You leave your day job, you come to Washington for 2 or 4, maybe 6 years, you serve your country, then you go back to your real life. They did not envision permanent Washington where people are in there dying at their desks on Capitol Hill. Right. That's the exact opposite of what they envisioned. Trump is exactly what the founding fathers envisioned. Regular guy, sees a problem with the country, runs, wins, serves, does his duty, and wants to go back to his real life. He is actually what they wanted out of all of this. But permanent Washington can't have that. And when he came in and showed that the job's not that hard, I mean, this is not to say the issues aren't complicated. Right. They are. But he was like, well, dude, if I want to pick up the phone and call Kim Jong-un and have a conversation, maybe it works out, maybe it doesn't, but nobody's going to stop me from doing that. You insane? He showed them all to be emperors with no clothes. Right. And he came in and started fixing America's problems, the border, the economy, manufacturing, you name it. And it made them all look bad and showed them for the naked power grabbers that they are. And he wasn't one of them. They made this mystique around the president. You have to be one of us to be president. Mm-hmm. Also so that they can control you. They couldn't control Trump. Mm-hmm. And he was delivering for the American people, could not be controlled, and still can't. And this is why they have thrown the kitchen sink at this man for 8 years.
You know what's so funny? We're going to wrap up shortly, but it's funny that you brought up the Kim Jong-un, because this is, mind you, this is while I'm a Democrat and I don't like Trump. That was the one thing I actually really liked. I was like, yeah, why not talk to him? Because I always felt like, is this working? Is by ignoring him working? No, he's still developing or still attempting to develop nuclear weapons, supposedly. Yeah. So if doing that's not stopping him, so what's wrong with talking? Like, how do you develop peace if you're not willing to have a conversation? And so I was like, I actually kind of agree. If it doesn't work, it wasn't working in the first place. Right. But the fact that he was willing to have a conversation with them, people want to make it seem like he called them, so now we're now part of the axis of evil or something. It's just like, no.
So stupid.
We talk to everybody.
Yeah, Donald Trump is an existential threat to their iron grip on power and control over us and the whole globalist agenda and deep state agenda. He comes out of the outside. He has enough money where they can't compromise him in any way. And everything about his life has been out there, right? The divorces, the affairs, like he is a very imperfect person. And I know as a fellow believer, you know all of the biblical stories. God constantly chooses very imperfect people, from Abraham to Moses to Noah, who was a drunk, to David, who was committing adultery, to all the disciples, very imperfect people. Because as you and I are both believers, there was only one perfect person to ever walk this earth, Jesus Christ.
Right.
The rest of us all have flaws, and we all sin and everything else. But you know, he's a very imperfect person. But my friend Steve Bannon calls him an armor-piercing shell. So he has gone in to the belly of the beast, of the deep state and the regime and the uni party and all of those dark forces, and pierced the shell. They can't have that, which is why they continue to throw everything they have at this man to try to stop him. Not just him, but the America First movement.
Yeah. Well, we're nearing the end. I'd like to ask as a final question, are you optimistic about the future?
It's so funny that you asked me that, because I think I asked you that when you were on my show.
Yes.
And I ask pretty much all of my guests the exact same question. Are you optimistic? I am by nature a happy warrior, and it's sort of been my brand throughout my entire media career, political career, because I'm a natural optimist anyway. And I do still believe God is on the throne. Mm-hmm. I do believe God allows bad things to happen to individuals, to families, to countries. And there's always a purpose to it, in my view, to bring more people to him, to realize you can't do this alone, that you need faith in God, and countries need faith. I really believe America has lost its way in terms of God. We were founded as a Judeo-Christian country, and we have really gone off the reservation. There's a lot of evil right in our face now, a lot of demons making themselves known. Mm-hmm. And I think this is a real tipping point for the country. We are in a rolling Marxist revolution that started nearly a century ago to infiltrate and destroy us from within. So when people say, well, how did we get here, right? I mean, this is crazy. Did it start under Obama, or Biden's destroying the country? This has been going on for almost 100 years, which is why now we're at the tipping point. And I think all of those forces trying to destroy the country and the West are very evil. I think at base, this is a spiritual battle. Mm-hmm. God versus the enemy, good versus evil, however you want to put it. But it is on a plane higher than us. They're not just Trump versus Biden. This is something bigger going on here. Right. Sorry. You can edit it out, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So there's something much bigger going on here. And because I am a believer, I really do. I am an optimist. And I think at some point, God is going to put his foot down. It's not going to be pretty. But I think we need to, as we're doing now, really hit rock bottom as a nation to open a lot of people's eyes, bring them back to God, which we are seeing a lot of people going back to church, renewing their faith. We're seeing it happen a lot, but also to bring the country back to its foundational principles. Yeah. So as painful as all of this is, and this Biden presidency is an historic catastrophe, but to what we were talking about earlier, it's actually waking a lot of people up and bringing them, having them leave the Democrat Party, like you, realize they're being lied to, realize their lives are being destroyed, their communities are being decimated, and they're starting to see things more clearly. And so the political realignment that began in 2015 and 2016 is now accelerating. So if there's any silver lining to this disaster, it's that. Mm-hmm. And then once you see it, as in your case, you're a walking testament to this. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Right. And then you become much more of an independent thinker as you are a critical thinker. You're not just swallowing the lies anymore. You're actually doing your own thinking and making your own decisions. Yeah. That is a beautiful thing. And that's why I cherish our friendship so much, because I want everybody to have the journey that everybody on the other side, I want to have the journey that you have had.
Yeah.
It's a huge testament to your faith and your intellect and your inner strength.
Thank you. I appreciate that. The one thing I want to add, I'm an optimistic person. So anyone
You and
who's
I
seen
here are both happy warriors.
Yeah. Everything comes in waves. That's kind of how I see things. Today's problems are not going to be tomorrow's problems. It'll be something else. But I'm optimistic because I have faith, first and foremost. But yeah, I'll just leave it as that.
Yeah.
I've gone over this multiple times. But the thing I want to point out, have you ever seen the movie PCU?
No.
If you ever get a chance, it's from the 90s. It stands for Portchester University, but it kind of has a double meaning. Some people call it politically correct university.
Okay.
And everything that you're seeing that's happening on campuses was in that movie. So young Jeremy Pivens is in it. Jon Favreau, young Jon Favreau is in it. So there's a whole bunch of actors who are like, oh, I didn't know they were in this movie. It's a comedy. So it's a funny movie to watch. David Spade is in it as well. He's kind of like the antagonist in the movie. But when you watch the movie, you're like, oh my God, it's the same stuff that's happening in the college. So it's been going on for a while, so much so that they made a movie about it, about how this place used to be kind of fun. And now everybody's so uptight and serious. My favorite is there is a group of leftists that you could say, actually, a group of leftists that were there that they would make fun of them because, oh, this is the thing now. So whatever the thing is, free Mandela, he's free already. That was one of the jokes. Oh, so what are we on to now? Save the planet. All right, save the planet. Yeah, no meat. So they would every other week they would have a new protest.
Different cause. Right. So to make a serious point on it, and by the way, I will see that movie because it sounds great and I love this. And just last night, Forrest Gump was playing again on HBO. I've seen it a million times.
One of my favorite movies.
One of my favorites too. Yeah. And it's sort of one of my comfort movies. So whenever it's on, I watch it. It gives me comfort.
Yeah.
And the scene where he goes to Washington and he's accidentally in front of the mall with thousands of people protesting the Vietnam War. And then Jenny comes running out into the water. But once he and Jenny reconnect, she takes him to her new group of friends who are all radicals.
Right.
She introduces Forrest to her boyfriend, who she says is a lieutenant in the SDS, the Weather Underground, the violent radicals. But they're also meeting with the Black Panthers, right? And I noticed last night when I was watching, there was a sign up against the wall at the Black Panthers meeting that says Colombia is the enemy of all Black people. That's in Forrest Gump. And I was like, I got to talk about this on my podcast this week because the campus protests go back to the Vietnam War, right? So, and it's been ongoing, and you're exactly right. There's a famous saying that says, the issue is never the issue. The issue is always the revolution.
Right.
So what we're seeing now is actually more Maoist than Stalinist, because Mao had begun his cultural revolution, etc., wasn't getting traction. The Chinese Communist Party was getting ready to throw him out. And so he went to the students, because universities are concentrated energy, right? Mm-hmm. He went to the students. They ran with it because kids are, easily radicalized. They ran with it, and the Cultural Revolution in China actually got so extreme, with blood literally flowing in the streets, got a little too crazy even for Mao, and he had trouble reining in those forces. So what you're seeing on college campuses, the top line issue is pro-Hamas. It's always about the revolution. Right. And so you and I spend all of our time trying to wake people up to what's actually going on. And I so appreciate you and our time together.
Yeah, likewise. I really do. Thank you so much for having me here and sitting down with me. This was a very interesting talk.
Oh, for me too.
Yes.
For me too. Thank you. And I really do cherish your friendship, Adam. You're amazing.
Thank you. Thank you so much.